talking about Uganda's tax system, first of all, we know it is I would call it a two-tier tax system. Two-tier in a sense that it has the central government and also the local government. You collect central government revenue by Uganda Revenue Authority, but also we know local governments and municipalities collect their own taxes and revenues. And of course that has always, if you know, especially in municipalities, that has always been a challenge, because when KCCA, for instance, collects property rates on property, and the Uganda Revenue Authority comes and tells them you have to pay rental income on property, they think it's a double taxation. Yet these are only two different tiers of the tax system. So structurally, it's a two-tiered system. And of course, we are aware that in terms of policy, so in terms of administration, we know the Uganda Revenue Authority is responsible for collecting the central government taxes, while the local governments collect their local government taxes. And in terms of policy and governance, the Ministry of Finance is responsible for tax policy formulation. Of course, in terms of law, there are quite a number of laws that govern the tax system, including the VAT Act, Income Tax Act, Excise Duty Management Act, East African Community Management Act, the Customs Management Act, the Local Government Act. There are a series of laws that assist in governing the tax system. So in summary, that's what I would think, and maybe what we can say when we speak in terms of the structuring or the structure of the tax system. You find, of course, we have what we call indirect, and then we have direct taxes. The indirect taxes, if you are to speak to the normal language, it would mean those taxes whose impact falls directly on the person paying them. While indirect taxes, the burden is not felt. For instance, if you talk of value-added tax, when I buy water which has value-added tax, I don't feel the impact directly because I'm consuming the water. But when you slap 40% of my salary, that's a direct what? A direct tax. So those are the two categories. We have direct and indirect taxes. And then the indirect taxes are largely on consumables. Consumables, you can think of VAT and excise duty, water, airtime, things we use in the day-to-day life. While for the direct taxes, it is on your direct income. You must feel the burden directly. So that's how it is structured. And I think from the analysis we've so far conducted, you find that for Uganda's tax system in particular, they over-rely on indirect taxes as opposed to direct taxes. And over-reliance in direct taxes has ramifications to the extent that they are very easy to collect. For instance, if I'm consuming a bottle of water, I may not know that I'm actually incurring a tax. If I'm using Colgate or toothpaste, I may not know that I'm paying a tax. If I'm driving fuel, I may not know that I'm actually paying a tax. So it is very easy to administer because the user does not feel the impact directly. While for direct taxes, the pinch is felt direct. So that one faces a little bit of resistance because the consumer or the taxpayer feels it directly. So that's why you find much of the way the tax system is designed here, much of our collections tend to be largely skewed to indirect taxes because it is easier for government to collect those taxes as opposed to direct taxes. Yeah. See, that's how, and in terms of equity and fairness, that's why people say that indirect taxes tend to be more regressive than direct taxes because they say, for instance, if they say 18% VAT on water, they don't mind your income status. It means even those who are earning higher are paying the same what? Tax. So the burden is higher on someone who earns little because what 18% can do to a rich man's income is negligible compared to what it can do to a poor man's income. So that's why people who promote fairness and equity have an argument that a tax system that is largely dependent on indirect taxes is likely to be regressive and is likely to promote income inequality as opposed to the one which is direct. So most tax systems always, which are trying to attain what we call fairness, tend to pursue an angle of having more direct taxes contributing to total tax collections as opposed to indirect taxes. I think every country would wish to pursue a progressive tax regime. What usually hampers that progressivity is anchored on the priorities of the government. What are the government priorities for its citizens? Okay? Because when you say tax system is progressive, it has to inculcate the issues of equity and fairness and all gender, including women and men. It has to inculcate levels of reduced income inequalities. In other words, you realize that actually the wealthier you get, the more tax you should pay. It should inculcate the principle of trying to control for consumption of what we call harmful products. Okay, in other words, make consumption of harmful products to the citizens prohibitive to promote their health. For instance, if it's alcohol, smoking, and the rest. All that can be defined through progressivity. And then when you also make these multinational companies pay their fair share. I mean, if you have a very large company here and it only pays just peanut of the would-be amount that's supposed to go to government, and it's robbing government of money, then the tax system is not being progressive. So all those factors, if considered, would make a system very fair and transparent and progressive and so on. But what usually happens is that if the government does not set its priorities right, then it is very hard to achieve a progressive tax system. What do I mean by setting priorities right? Let's think of the Ugandan example. You have a guiding framework for planning, which is called the National Development Plan. I think the current one is NDP3. And you have set what we call priority sectors. That I will do agriculture, I will do ICT, I will do human capital development, and the rest. How do you finance those sectors? How are you addressing the tax policy to target those sectors? If, for instance, you're saying ICT is in your National Development Plan 3 as a priority sector, and you are introducing taxes that are stopping people from access and affordable internet, are you actually moving towards a progressive regime? Okay, 2. The second one is you need to understand the income dividends of your nationals. Okay? Who are the rich? Who are the poor? Are high net worth individuals targeted? The people we call high net worth individuals. How much they contribute to the national basket? Like, I've had cases where some people that have authority can call and they don't pay the tax. How do you attain progressivity if you still have such characters? How independent is the revenue authority against political interference? Can a domestic taxes officer, for instance, walk into a supermarket or into a shop or into a store and say, I'm here to collect revenues, and they are not intimidated? Can they just put an assessment and the money is paid without intimidation? The level of autonomy of the revenue collection agents against political interference is a good aspect in promoting progressivity. Another aspect that you can think to attain the same result is the investment in research to inform tax policy formulation. You do not just wake up and say, I have put such and such a tax. I've raised the rates. I've raised the rates to this percentage. How have you invested in generating research to inform that this is the impact of that particular tax? Now, what is happening in Uganda is that oftentimes the policymakers are driven by revenue motives. As long as you put a number to a given change and say, this revenue measure is going to generate us this amount of money, the rest of the impacts can wait. How it's going to be implemented, how much it will affect the medium and small scale enterprises, how easy is it for the revenue administration to implement the same, are all shelved. For as long as you attach a number and say, I'm raising this tax to generate this amount of revenue. That's all they need to see. So those are some of the aspects that the investment in research and honoring the recommendations of that research to inform tax policy formulation will go a long way in helping us attain a progressive tax system. Tax incentives, with all their intent, are not always naturally very bad. But the concerns that govern tax incentives are to do with what we call governance of the tax incentives. And when we talk about governance, one, beyond the objectives of the tax incentives, be it promoting foreign direct investment, be it creating jobs, be it export promotion, be it increasing domestic production, regardless of the intent of the tax incentives, you need to address the following issues. One, are the citizens aware of who are the potential beneficiaries of tax incentives? Does the legal regime provide for transparency? For instance, in Uganda, if I ask you how many people have tax holidays, as a normal LA person, are you able to tell me that these are the beneficiaries of it? Does the system provide for that level of transparency? How do you select the sectors that are going to benefit? Are they sectors that are promoting production? Are they sectors that are pro-poor in terms to think of agriculture, health, and the rest? Are they sectors that are characterized by government failure so that you need a domestic, private investment? All those should be in the eyes of the public to understand that actually tax incentives are good for our own economy, and it's what they are doing. By that said, you also need to be transparent in terms of their cost. I know in Uganda we have the Access to Information Act, where citizens are allowed to request the government for any information regarding such. But should we wait for that? Why shouldn't the government just come out and tell us that actually we found out that company is merits to get a 10-year tax holiday, but it will generate this number of jobs in Uganda. It will generate this number of forward and backward linkages in terms of the multiplier. It will pay this in terms of other taxes other than the tax that has been forgiven. We need to know all that. We don't want to have companies that will come here and enjoy a 10-year tax holiday, and afterwards they lift, they go to another country, or they change name and come and benefit another 10 years on tax holiday. That has been another concern. Then another part of governance also has to do with what we call the race to the bottom. In other words, you are trying to compete with other neighbors, because Rwanda has said that any company headquartered in Rwanda will not pay tax for the next 10 years. You're also doing it because you want to attract investors in your country to leave Rwanda and come to Uganda. Should we always follow that direction? Can't we have our own stand? Because all research has pointed to the fact that tax is not among the top 3 or the top 5 factors that attract investment. Why don't we invest in other ventures that attract tax incentives, that attract investors, including infrastructure, energy, cheaper energy, okay, access to market, availability of labor? These are all factors that can attract an investor, making the economy very certain that when there are any disputes, the investor can settle their grievances in an independent court of law that will award him costs or not, but the case can be expeditiously handled. All those factors have to be taken into consideration. And then you will also need to do what we call a cost-benefit analysis. How much revenue am I going to forego for those 10 years vis-a-vis how much benefits are accruing? And then finally, the component that is very critical is the monitoring aspects. It is one thing for an investor to tell us they are going to create this number of jobs. It's another if they have created those number of jobs after those years. Who is monitoring the progress from when they go to the investment license and exemption up to when the investment is even expiring? This should be on an annual basis to see the progress is in line with what they promised to do. That's when you can be able to assess the cost and the benefit. And from the humanitarian angle, also you need to do what we call responsive investment assessment. How are they treating the people they're employing? How are they treating the environment? What's the impact of the activity on the general community around them? For instance, if it is mining and you invest against a tax holiday, who are the workers? How much are they paid? How are they treated in terms of human rights? Are you using underage children to pursue your economic goals? All those factors need to be taken into consideration, such that someone does not take a tax incentive as a blanket. They should be adhering to certain conditions which are helping the government to recoup benefits to outweigh the costs in terms of revenue foregone. In Uganda, for instance, property taxes are largely associated with the real estate sector. But that's not where the problem begins. The problem begins on how regulated the sector itself is. If I ask you if we have a list of brokers in Kampala alone, or even in your own division, if you know them and how many there are, we don't have such a record. If I ask you the list of landlords in one division in Kampala, you may not have them. True landlords. The sector itself is already very informal, with the middlemen benefiting actually much more than the actual owners. Now, before you think of even property taxes being successful, how do we ensure that the sector is regulated and formalized to be able to understand who the actual actors are? For instance, did you know that majority of the actual owners of buildings in Kampala depend on loans? The sector is almost 90% financed by borrowed money. Yes. That's why they celebrated when the government decided to say, if you're paying interest on a mortgage loan, it should be a deductible expense from your rental income. They celebrated because almost 90% of the owners are using borrowed money. Don't ask me where the 10% is. I'm going to tell you. The 10% is stolen money. Because the real estate sector is easy to hide stolen money. Those who are owning are not borrowing, are hiding ill-gotten money, either through money laundering or through corruption. Because the sector where you can hide money easily. You steal 300 million, construct your apartments, and start getting money. Very few people will follow you because the sector is not regulated. Let's discuss issues of the land tenure system. How effective is it in Uganda? Let's discuss issues to do with the land registry. Why should people own three? Why should the land title have three owners? So before you even think of how you can properly get money from that sector, there are many other issues you need to first address. Very many other issues, and those are the ones that I'm talking about. Regulating the sector to know who the actors are so that we can manage them very well. But that said, property taxes, the sector itself has potential for taxation. It has potential because the level of urbanization in Uganda is very fast. But we also don't forget that the more the level of urbanization, the more we have people who need housing. The demand for housing will increase. That means they make more money, in other words. Okay? But also you don't forget that there are commercial buildings with an occupancy rate of about 2%. If you go downtown, you may find a 5-story commercial building, but with only 3 floors that are occupied. The upper floors are not. It means the people who are supposed to occupy those places have not attained enough disposable income to be part of them and be able to rent those buildings. So it is a whole big aspect, factors to look at. So that when you come to tax the owner of a commercial building, you have to take care of all those aspects. Then there was this issue of what we call dollarization of rent. People were paying rent in dollars. Dollars which are fluctuating based on a shilling. So it means whenever the dollar raises, the person paying has to incur a lot of cost to, and that does not translate into the tax for government. So those are some of the dynamics. But I don't doubt the potential for the sector to generate revenue if it is well managed. You and I will agree, for instance, that until recently, when Musi was getting out of high executive director chair, is when we started seeing our roads mapped to know that this is Ssuna close, this is, which state exists in the world which is not mapped? It meant that we did not even know locations of property. Geomapping was not done in the city. How can you effectively tax a property whose owners you don't know? National Water will come and do their mapping and also make their own assessment. UMEME does their assessment. How can the Revenue Authority follow those assessments? And now I'm seeing they're introducing taxes on internet data. When you want to promote a system where if a revenue officer wants information about my property, they can go to National Water, or National Water can send their database to the Revenue Authority. All they're interconnected so that I can be able to trace all your properties. All that is not done. So whether you raise the tax or lower it, as long as you don't address those key issues, the potential of the sector to give you the revenue that you really wanted may not be attained. Okay? Yeah, because true ownership of property by African descent, some of them are inherited, others write them in their sons' names, others write them in their concubines' names. How do you ensure that this is the true owner of this particular property? We have not reached there as Uganda, in my own opinion. We have not yet reached there. That identification aspect. That's why I'm happy that recently there is a whole insistence on using the national identification number for everything. Because that will try to say that when I go for traffic offense, they know NIN is this. When I go to pay water, they know this. We should move to that direction, that when you type in my national identification number, everything about me comes, including property I own. That would be the dream destination. That's when you are able to tell that when I went, you can even monitor my purchases and know this man consumes this amount of goods in a given week using my national identification number. This is where we should strive to go, but we are not yet there. Money that has been obtained through corruption is hidden in the real estate sector. So when you bring anything, any law that is trying to either formalize or cause to formalize, or cause that landlord or owner property to pay that tax, they wouldn't want to push it because it's affecting them. When the other players in the sector are being outplayed by the policymakers. That is true. Some of the policies around taxation of property is not being punitive, or it's not impacting because some of the decision makers or policymakers are actually owners of these properties which you want to tax.